Imagine a sunny beach where tiny sea turtle hatchlings instinctively make their way to the ocean, while nearby a father and son learn to surf together. Unlike the turtles, humans aren't born knowing how to swim or surf, we must learn these skills. This contrast highlights the remarkable human ability to learn, adapt, and build knowledge over time. Across cultures and generations, we've developed entire institutions dedicated to learning, but what exactly is learning? In this video, we'll explore the fascinating processes behind how we acquire new behaviors and knowledge, setting the stage for a deeper dive into the science of learning. Learning is more than just memorizing facts or practicing skills. It's a relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge that results from experience. Unlike instincts or reflexes, which are innate and automatic, learned behaviors require exposure, practice, and sometimes even mistakes. For example, while a baby sea turtle heads straight for the ocean without guidance, a child must spend time and effort to master swimming or surfing. Learning allows us to adapt to our environment, solve problems, and develop new abilities, making it a cornerstone of human growth and development. Many behaviors in animals, like birds building nests or salmon swimming upstream, are unlearned. They're driven by instincts or reflexes. Reflexes are simple, automatic responses to specific stimuli, like a baby's sucking reflex. Instincts are more complex patterns triggered by broader events, such as migration. Both help organisms survive but don't require learning. In contrast, learned behaviors develop through experience and practice. For instance, learning to surf or speak a language involves conscious effort and repeated exposure, setting humans apart from many other species. But what exactly is learning? Psychologists define it as a relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge due to experience. This means that learning isn't just about temporary changes or one-off actions, it's about lasting transformation. Whether you're mastering a new sport, picking up a language, or understanding a scientific concept, learning involves both conscious and unconscious processes. Our brains naturally connect events that happen together, forming the basis for different types of learning. There are three primary forms of learning: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Classical conditioning involves associating two events that happen together, often unconsciously. Operant conditioning is about learning from the consequences of our actions, rewards, and punishments. Observational learning, on the other hand, is learning by watching others and imitating their behavior. Each form plays a unique role in how we adapt and acquire new skills throughout life. Associative learning is at the heart of both classical and operant conditioning. It occurs when we make connections between stimuli or events that happen together in our environment. For example, if you hear thunder after seeing lightning, you might start to anticipate the sound whenever you see a flash. Our minds are wired to connect events that occur in sequence, helping us predict and respond to the world around us. Classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, is a process where organisms learn to associate two stimuli that occur together. Ivan Pavlov's famous experiments with dogs showed that a neutral stimulus like a bell could become associated with food, causing the dogs to salivate at the sound alone. This type of learning is common in everyday life, from developing food preferences to forming emotional responses. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist, discovered classical conditioning while studying digestion in dogs. He noticed that dogs would start to salivate not just at the sight of food, but also at cues associated with feeding, like the sound of footsteps or a bell. Through controlled experiments, Pavlov showed that a neutral stimulus, when paired repeatedly with an unconditioned stimulus like food, could trigger a learned response. This groundbreaking work laid the foundation for understanding how associations form in the brain. Classical conditioning, an unconditioned stimulus like food, naturally produces an unconditioned response like salivation. A neutral stimulus like a bell initially has no effect, but when the bell is paired with food repeatedly, the dog learns to associate the two. Eventually, the bell alone triggers salivation, now called a conditioned response. This process demonstrates how new behaviors can be learned through association. Classical conditioning isn't limited to laboratory experiments. It happens in real life all the time. For example, a cancer patient who feels nauseous after chemotherapy may start to feel sick just entering the doctor's office. Or a cat gets excited at the sound of a can opener, anticipating food. These examples show how everyday experiences can shape our responses through learned association. Sometimes a conditioned stimulus can be used to condition a new neutral stimulus, a process called higher-order or second-order conditioning. For instance, if a cat learns to associate the sound of a can opener with food, and then starts to associate the squeak of a cabinet with the can opener, the squeak alone can trigger excitement. However, it's difficult to go beyond second-order conditioning, as the associations become weaker with each step. Classical conditioning can even be observed in wild animals. For example, stingrays at Stingray City in the Cayman Islands have learned to associate the sound of boat engines with food, thanks to years of fishermen feeding them. Now, whenever a boat arrives, the stingrays gather, expecting a meal. This shows how animals adapt their behavior based on repeated experiences with certain cues. Humans are also subject to classical conditioning. Bobbies may get excited at the sight of a formula canister, anticipating feeding time. Dogs can learn to avoid the edge of a yard if it's associated with an unpleasant shock from an invisible fence. These examples highlight how our experiences shape our reactions, sometimes without us even realizing it. Initial phase of classical conditioning is called acquisition, when the organism learns to connect a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. Timing is crucial. Usually, the conditioned stimulus should come just before the unconditioned stimulus for the association to form. In some cases, like taste aversion, even a single pairing with a long delay can create a strong association, helping us avoid harmful foods. Taste aversion is a special case of classical conditioning where a person or animal learns to avoid a particular food after just one bad experience, like getting sick after eating something. This rapid learning is thought to be an evolutionary adaptation, helping us quickly avoid potentially dangerous foods. Research shows that some associations like taste and illness are easier to form than others, reflecting biological constraints on learning. Strength of a conditioned response often depends on how reliably the conditioned stimulus predicts the unconditioned stimulus. For example, if dinner is always served at 6:00, you might start feeling hungry just before that time, but if dinner time varies, the association is weaker. Consistency helps reinforce learned associations, making our responses more predictable. What happens when the conditioned stimulus is presented without the unconditioned stimulus? Over time, the learned response fades, a process called extinction. However, after a break, the response can suddenly reappear, known as spontaneous recovery. For example, if a dog stops getting food after hearing a bell, it will eventually stop salivating. But after some time, the bell may trigger salivation again, showing that learned associations can persist even after extinction. Stimulus discrimination occurs when an organism learns to respond only to the specific conditioned stimulus, not to similar ones. For example, Pavlov's dogs learned to salivate only to the particular tone that signaled food, not to other sounds. This ability helps animals and humans respond appropriately to different cues in their environment, enhancing survival and efficiency. On the flip side, stimulus generalization happens when an organism responds to stimuli that are similar to the conditioned stimulus. For instance, a cat might come running at the sound of an electric mixer if it sounds like the can opener associated with food. Over time, with consistent reinforcement, the animal learns to discriminate between the two sounds, refining its responses. Study of learning took a major turn with the rise of behaviorism, led by John B. Watson. Behaviorists argued that psychology should focus on observable behaviors, not hidden mental processes. Watson believed that human behavior, like animal behavior, could be explained by conditioning. His famous experiments with little Albert demonstrated that even emotions like fear could be conditioned through association. 1920, Watson and his colleague Rosalie Rayner conducted a controversial experiment with a baby known as Little Albert. Initially unafraid of various animals and objects, Albert was conditioned to fear a white rat by pairing it with a loud, frightening noise. Soon, Albert's fear generalized to other furry objects, demonstrating how phobias could develop through classical conditioning. While groundbreaking, this experiment would be considered unethical by today's standards. While classical conditioning explains how we learn associations between stimuli, operant conditioning focuses on how we learn from the consequences of our actions. Developed by B. F. Skinner, operant conditioning is about reinforcement and punishment, how rewards encourage behaviors and punishments discourage them. This form of learning shapes much of our daily behavior, from working for a paycheck to training pets. Skinner used specially designed boxes, now called Skinner boxes, to study how animals like rats and pigeons learn through operant conditioning. By pressing levers or pecking discs, the animals could receive food rewards. Skinner observed how different patterns of reinforcement and punishment influenced the animal's behavior, providing insights into how consequences shape learning. Operant conditioning, reinforcement increases the likelihood of a behavior, while punishment decreases it. Reinforcement can be positive, adding something pleasant, or negative, removing something unpleasant. Punishment can also be positive, adding something unpleasant, or negative, removing something pleasant. Understanding these distinctions helps us see how behaviors are shaped and maintained in everyday life. Positive reinforcement involves adding a desirable stimulus to increase a behavior. For example, giving a child a toy for cleaning their room or receiving a paycheck for working are both forms of positive reinforcement. This approach is highly effective in encouraging desired behaviors, both in children and adults. Negative reinforcement means removing an unpleasant stimulus to increase a behavior. For instance, fastening your seatbelt to stop a car's beeping sound is negative reinforcement. The annoying sound goes away when you do the desired action. This principle is also used in animal training, where pressure is removed when the correct behavior is performed. Punishment, unlike reinforcement, is used to decrease unwanted behaviors. Positive punishment adds an unpleasant stimulus, like scolding a student for texting in class. Negative punishment removes something pleasant, such as taking away a toy when a child misbehaves. While punishment can be effective, it may also have negative side effects, such as teaching fear or encouraging aggression, so it should be used carefully. Shaping is a technique used in operant conditioning to teach complex behaviors by reinforcing small steps toward the goal. Instead of waiting for the desired behavior to occur perfectly, each closer approximation is rewarded. This method is widely used in animal training and can also help children learn tasks by breaking them down into manageable steps. Reinforcers can be primary or secondary. Primary reinforcers like food, water, and shelter satisfy basic biological needs and are naturally rewarding. Secondary reinforcers such as money or tokens have value because they are linked to primary reinforcers. For example, a child may earn stickers secondary that can be traded for a toy primary. Token economies use this principle to encourage positive behaviors in schools and other settings. Timeout is a common form of negative punishment used with children. When a child misbehaves, they are removed from a desirable activity for a short period. This technique works best when the timeout is brief and consistent, and when the child is calmly directed to the less desirable setting. The goal is to decrease unwanted behavior by taking away something enjoyable. Not all reinforcement is given every time a behavior occurs. Continuous reinforcement rewards every correct response and is effective for teaching new behaviors. Partial reinforcement, where rewards are given only some of the time, helps maintain behaviors over the long term. The timing and pattern of reinforcement can greatly influence how quickly and strongly a behavior is learned. Partial reinforcement schedules can be fixed or variable, and based on intervals, time, or ratios, number of responses. Fixed interval schedules reward behavior after a set time, like a weekly paycheck. Variable interval schedules reward after unpredictable time periods, like checking for a random email. Fixed ratio schedules reward after a set number of responses, while variable ratio schedules reward after an unpredictable number, like gambling. Each schedule produces different patterns of behavior. Gambling is a classic example of a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, where rewards are unpredictable. This schedule is highly effective at maintaining behavior, making gambling addictive and resistant to extinction. The brain's reward centers are activated by the uncertainty and excitement, sometimes even more by near misses than actual wins. This powerful effect helps explain why people keep playing, hoping for the next big win. Operant conditioning: extinction occurs when reinforcement stops and the learned behavior gradually disappears. The speed of extinction depends on the reinforcement schedule. Behaviors learned under variable ratio schedules, like gambling, are especially resistant to extinction, while those learned under fixed interval schedules fade more quickly when rewards stop. Not all learning is immediately visible. Edward Tolman's experiments with rats showed that organisms can learn without immediate reinforcement, a process called latent learning. Rats develop mental maps of mazes even without rewards, demonstrating their knowledge only when motivated by food. This finding challenged the idea that reinforcement is always necessary for learning, highlighting the role of cognitive processes. Latent learning also occurs in humans. For example, a child may learn the route to school by riding with a parent every day, but only demonstrates this knowledge when they have to travel alone. We build cognitive maps, mental representations of our environment, that help us navigate new places like museums or hospitals, even if we've never walked the route before. Observational learning, or modeling, is learning by watching others and imitating their actions. This type of learning is common in both humans and animals. For example, chimpanzees can learn new ways to drink juice by observing others, and children often pick up behaviors by watching parents, teachers, or peers. Observational learning allows us to acquire new skills without direct experience. Research suggests that a special type of brain cell, called a mirror neuron, plays a role in observational learning. These neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we see someone else do it, helping us imitate and understand others' behaviors. This mechanism is thought to underlie our ability to learn by watching and to empathize with others. Psychologist Albert Bandura expanded on behaviorism by introducing social learning theory, which emphasizes the role of cognitive processes in learning. Bandura argued that we don't just imitate others blindly, we also consider the consequences of their actions. Observational learning involves attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. Each step is crucial for successfully modeling a behavior. Bandura identified 3 types of models: live, verbal, and symbolic. A live model demonstrates a behavior in person, like a yoga instructor showing a pose. A verbal model explains or describes the behavior, such as a coach giving instructions. A symbolic model can be a character in a book, movie, or video. Each type of model can influence how we learn new behaviors. For observational learning to occur, 4 steps must be followed: attention, focusing on the model; retention, remembering what was observed; reproduction, being able to perform the behavior; and motivation, wanting to imitate the behavior. Whether we choose to imitate depends on what happens to the model. If they are rewarded, we're more likely to copy them; if punished, less so. Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiment showed how children imitate aggressive behavior. When children watched an adult act aggressively toward a Bobo doll, they were more likely to do the same, especially if the adult was rewarded or not punished. This experiment demonstrated the powerful influence of observational learning and the importance of role models in shaping behavior. Observational learning can have both positive prosocial and negative antisocial effects. Children who see kindness, honesty, and helpfulness are more likely to adopt those behaviors. On the other hand, exposure to aggression or violence can lead to similar behaviors. Parents, teachers, and public figures serve as important role models, influencing how children and even adults behave. Research suggests that exposure to violent media, such as television shows, movies, or video games, may increase aggressive thoughts and behaviors, especially in children. However, the relationship is complex, and other factors like family environment and mental health also play a role. Psychologists continue to study how media influences behavior, emphasizing the importance of understanding both correlation and causation. Learning is a complex process that shapes who we are and how we interact with the world. From innate instincts to learned behaviors, from classical and operant conditioning to observational learning, each process plays a vital role in our development. By understanding how learning works, we can better appreciate the power of experience, the influence of role models, and the importance of positive reinforcement in shaping our lives.